In the quiet suburban neighborhood of Maplewood Ridge, the morning sun always seemed to rise a little too politely. Every lawn was trimmed to regulation height, every driveway power washed to perfection, and every mailbox painted the same dull shade of beige. It was the kind of neighborhood that thrived on uniformity, a place where nothing stood out, and that was exactly how the HOA liked it. Among the neatly aligned houses sat a modest two-story home with a small front yard and a perfectly ordinary white fence. The house belonged to a retired Marine named David Collins. He'd bought the place 5 years earlier, looking for peace after 20 years of service. His yard was simple, no fancy fountains, no flashy lights. Just a small garden, a pair of lawn chairs, and a flagpole that stood proudly near the front walkway. The flag on that pole wasn't particularly large, but it was important. To David, it was more than fabric. It was history, sacrifice, and pride. Every morning at sunrise, he'd raise it. Every evening at sunset, he'd lower it and fold it with precision. It was a quiet ritual, one that gave him purpose and reminded him of the years he'd spent overseas. For the most part, his neighbors didn't mind. Some even appreciated the sight of the flag fluttering against the morning sky. But not everyone shared the sentiment. Across the street, in a house that looked as if it had been designed to host HOA meetings, lived a woman named Karen Whitmore. She was the president of the Homeowners Association, a self-appointed guardian of Maplewood Ridge's aesthetic integrity. Karen was known for her sharp eyes and even sharper opinions. She noticed everything: trash cans left out too long, fences that didn't match, cars parked an inch too close to the curb. And one morning, as she sipped her coffee by the bay window, she noticed something that she decided was an issue. David had recently replaced his old flag with a newer one, brighter, cleaner, and slightly larger than before. To Karen, that flag wasn't just a flag, it was a violation. Too bold, too visible, too patriotic. The letter arrived 3 days later. A cream-colored envelope with the HOA's logo embossed on the front slipped neatly into David's mailbox. Inside was a single sheet of paper outlining the concern. According to Section 4, subparagraph C of the HOA guidelines, no exterior decoration or display may be erected, maintained, or displayed that is deemed excessive or disruptive to the visual uniformity of the neighborhood. Karen's interpretation was simple. The flag was excessive. David read the letter twice, his brow furrowing in disbelief. He had read the HOA rules before moving in. Nowhere did it ban the national flag. The wording was vague, perhaps intentionally so, but he had never imagined that displaying the flag of his own country could be considered disruptive. He decided to ignore the letter, assuming it was a misunderstanding. But a week later, another one came, this time marked as an official warning. Then came the fines, $50, then $100, then $200. Each letter more aggressive than the last. David could have taken the easy route. He could have taken the flag down, paid the fine, and moved on. But the principle of it gnawed at him. After everything he'd given to that flag, the sweat, the blood, the sleepless nights, he couldn't bring himself to take it down because someone decided it didn't match the neighborhood. So instead of compliance, he started digging. He pulled out the HOA handbook, scouring every page for any mention of the flag. Nothing. He called the state housing authority and learned that, in fact, state law protected homeowners' rights to display the U.S. flag regardless of HOA restrictions. He even found federal legislation, the Freedom to Display the American Flag Act of 2005, that explicitly forbade HOAs from prohibiting such displays. That was all he needed. The next morning, David raised his flag higher than before. The pole gleamed in the sunlight, freshly polished. The flag waved with pride, catching the attention of everyone who drove by. To some, it was beautiful. To Karen, it was defiance. Over the next few days, Karen's campaign against him intensified. She began patrolling the street more frequently, clipboard in hand. She took photos, sent emails, and even tried to rally other board members to her cause. But not everyone shared her outrage. Some of the neighbors quietly sided with David, whispering their support when she wasn't around. Things escalated when Karen showed up at his door one afternoon. David wasn't home, but his neighbor across the street, Mrs. Ramos, watched from her porch as Karen pounded on the door, muttering about rules and examples. When no one answered, she left another letter, this time taped directly to the flagpole that BY that evening. David had had enough. He carefully peeled the letter off, folded it, and placed it on his kitchen counter. Then he sat at his table, sipping black coffee and staring at the flag outside. The edges rippled in the wind, proud and unbothered. That night, he had an idea. Not a petty one, but a pointed one. If Karen thought one flag was too patriotic, then maybe she needed a reminder of what patriotism really looked like. The following weekend, David drove to the hardware store and filled his truck with supplies, flag brackets, poles, and a box full of brand new American flags. He spent 2 days measuring, drilling, and mounting. One by one, the flags went up, along the fence, on the porch, above the garage. Small flags lined the walkway. Larger ones adorned the roof's edge. By the time he was done, his home wasn't just displaying a flag, it was draped in them. The house shimmered red, white, and blue from every angle. When Monday morning came, Maplewood Ridge woke up to a sight no one could ignore. The neighbors stopped and stared. Some smiled, some laughed, and others took photos. Karen, however, froze on the sidewalk, mouth agape, clutching her clipboard so tightly her knuckles turned white. The flags fluttered in perfect synchronization, each one a quiet rebellion. And for the first time since he'd moved in, David felt something he hadn't in years: satisfaction. He knew it wouldn't end there. He knew the letters, the threats, the outrage would follow. But for now, the message was clear: he wasn't taking his flag down. And the more she pushed, the more flags she'd see. As the sun set over Maplewood Ridge that evening, the light caught the edge of every flag, turning the neighborhood into a wave of color. It was beautiful. Too beautiful for some, perhaps, but it was only the beginning, because Karen wasn't done fighting, and neither was he. The next morning, Maplewood Ridge was buzzing. The once quiet neighborhood had transformed overnight into a battleground of opinions. Some residents admired David's boldness. Others whispered that he had gone too far. But no one could deny the spectacle. His house shimmered with red, white, and blue, an unapologetic wave of patriotism in the middle of suburbia. For most people, it was harmless. But for Karen Whitmore, it was nothing short of an affront. From her picture-perfect home across the street, she watched every car that slowed down to take photos of David's display. Each honk of approval felt like a personal insult. Each smiling passerby was another reminder that she had lost control of her neighborhood. Karen wasn't used to losing. She thrived on order, on rules, on the quiet power of her clipboard and her title. And now, all of that was slipping away. The board members she once commanded with ease had started to question her judgment. Some even avoided her calls. David's flags had done more than break a rule. They had exposed the limits of her authority, but Karen wasn't ready to accept defeat. Not yet. She started small. Anonymous complaints began circulating through the HOA inbox. Noise violations, improper modifications, visual pollution. Each one supposedly came from different residents, but their tone was identical: formal, indignant, and unmistakably written by her. The board scheduled an emergency meeting. David received the notice in the mail, printed in bold capital letters: mandatory appearance required. It was scheduled for Friday evening at the community clubhouse. That week, the tension grew thick. Neighbors avoided eye contact when walking their dogs. Cars slowed when passing his house, curious but cautious. David, meanwhile, went about his days as usual, watering the plants, trimming the hedges, keeping the flags clean and straight. He knew this wasn't really about the flags. It was about control, and he refused to give in. When Friday came, the clubhouse parking lot was full. Word of the conflict had spread far beyond Maplewood Ridge. Even a few outsiders showed up, curious to see the drama unfold. Inside, the air was stuffy, filled with murmurs and crossed arms. Karen sat at the head of the table, her papers stacked neatly, her expression carved in stone. David arrived calmly, a folder under his arm. Though there would be no shouting, no grand confrontation, the tension in the room was palpable. Karen began reading from her notes, her voice sharp and measured. She described his display as an egregious breach of community standards and a visual disturbance incompatible with neighborhood aesthetics. But then came David's quiet counterpoint. He presented the federal law protecting his right to display the American flag. He cited the exact wording of the HOA bylaws, pointing out the absence of any clause that prohibited it. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. Some began to fidget, realizing the extent of Karen's overreach. When he finished, the silence was deafening. Karen's cheeks flushed. She attempted to pivot, arguing that the quantity of flags might fall under decorative excess. But the damage was done. Everyone in that room could see what this really was, a personal vendetta dressed up as regulation. The board adjourned without a decision, claiming they would review the matter further. But by the time David walked out, it was clear who had already won the room. That weekend, the story spread. Someone, no one knew exactly who, had taken a photo of David's flag-covered house and posted it online with the caption, "HOA says this is too patriotic. What do you think?" Within hours, it went viral. Thousands of comments flooded in. People were outraged, amused, inspired. Local news stations picked it up, then regional ones, then national ones. By Sunday, David's front yard was a landmark. Cars drove by just to see it. Strangers left small flags at the edge of his lawn in solidarity. Veterans groups sent letters of support. Karen was furious. Her phone rang nonstop, reporters wanting statements, neighbors demanding explanations. She tried to spin the story, claiming the HOA had never opposed patriotism, but screenshots of her letters had already surfaced. Her words, her own rules, were now public record. David watched the chaos unfold from his porch, not with smugness, but with quiet disbelief. He hadn't expected any of this. He had acted out of principle, not for attention. But now, the entire country was watching Maplewood Ridge, a neighborhood that had once prided itself on silence and symmetry, become the center of a national debate about freedom, rules, and pride. Within the week, reporters began showing up. Vans with satellite dishes parked near the entrance. Interview requests piled up in his inbox. David gave one short interview, measured, respectful, calm. He didn't insult Karen. He didn't mock the HOA. He simply explained what had happened. A man who raised a flag, and an association that said it was too much. The clip went viral again. Viewers admired his restraint. His house became a symbol of quiet defiance, of standing up for one's rights without resorting to anger. Meanwhile, Karen's life had turned upside down. Neighbors who once admired her began to distance themselves. The board called an emergency vote of confidence. And though she fought it bitterly, the outcome was inevitable. Within a month, she was removed as HOA president. But losing the title didn't mean she gave up. In fact, it made her more unpredictable. She started filing complaints directly with the county. She claimed the flagpoles were unsafe, that the displays violated zoning codes, that the nightly floodlights constituted light pollution. Each claim was dismissed, but she kept filing, each rejection only fueling her resentment. At night, she'd watch from her window as the flags waved under the soft glow of David's porch lights. Every movement of the fabric seemed to mock her. The neighborhood no longer looked like the pristine, rule-bound community she once ruled over. Now it looked alive, imperfect, colorful, real, and deep down, she hated that point. One night, the wind picked up. The flags whipped through the air, snapping sharply in the gusts. Karen stood by her window, staring at them until her reflection disappeared into the glass. Somewhere behind those curtains, something in her snapped, because by the next morning, the neighborhood woke up to find that every single flag on David's fence, more than a dozen, had been ripped down in the night. The poles lay scattered across the grass, the flags torn and trampled. The neighbors gathered in silence, whispering. Some took photos. Others called the police. David stood in his driveway, motionless. The damage wasn't just vandalism. It was personal that he didn't say a word. He just stared at the torn fabric, the stars and stripes lying in the dirt. But in that silence, something hardened inside him. The fight wasn't over. Not even close. As the police began taking statements and neighbors speculated about who could have done it, David turned and walked back inside. The door closed softly behind him. In the window across the street, the curtains shifted just slightly. And though no one saw her, Karen smiled. The morning after the vandalism, Maplewood Ridge felt different. The air hung heavy with silence, the kind that follows after something unspoken has been broken. The once pristine neighborhood now looked like the aftermath of a storm. Torn flags lay scattered across David's lawn, their poles bent, their colors smeared with dirt. Neighbors emerged slowly, lingering on sidewalks and driveways, pretending to check their mail, while stealing glances toward his house. They all knew what had happened. They all knew who had likely done it. But in a place like Maplewood Ridge, where confrontation was taboo and reputations were currency, no one said her name aloud. The police had come and gone, their questions short and their notes brief. There were no witnesses, no cameras, no proof. But everyone knew the truth. Inside his house, David stood at the window, looking out over the wreckage. He wasn't angry, at least, not in the way people expected. The anger had burned out during the night, replaced by something colder, quieter, sharper. He had dealt with far worse before. What he felt now wasn't rage, it was resolve. That afternoon, he picked up each flag one by one. He didn't rush. He brushed off the dirt, straightened the fabric, and stacked them carefully in the garage. Some were beyond repair, but others could be salvaged by the time the sun began to set. He had cleared the lawn completely. To an outsider, it might have looked like surrender. The flags were gone. The yard was empty. Karen watched from her window across the street, her expression unreadable. For the first time in weeks, her street looked normal again. Uniform, controlled, but she should have known better, because David Collins didn't back down. He planned. The next day, he took a drive out of town to a veteran-owned print shop about 40 miles away. When he returned that evening, his truck was full again. Boxes stacked high, filled not with flags this time, but with something far more potent. Banners, decals, and printed sheets with a message bold enough to silence every critic in the neighborhood. He spent the next week working quietly, often late into the night. Neighbors heard the sounds of ladders and hammers, saw the glow of lights behind his curtains. But no one dared ask what he was doing. By Friday morning, they all found out. When the sun rose over Maplewood Ridge, it caught the face of David's house and lit up something extraordinary. The entire front of the building was now covered, not in cloth flags, but in a massive mural made of printed fabric panels. It stretched from roof to lawn, a seamless collage of red, white, and blue. In the center, in bold, towering letters, were the words, "Freedom isn't against the rules." Below it, smaller text read, "Dedicated to all who served." The mural was stunning. Professionally printed, perfectly aligned, and completely legal. It wasn't a flag, according to any technical definition. It was decorative artwork. And thanks to a small clause buried in the HOA handbook, decorative artwork was allowed as long as it didn't contain offensive or commercial material. It was flawless. Every inch of it followed the rules to the letter. By mid-morning, the street was filled with onlookers. Cars stopped to take photos. Some even clapped as they passed. The story reignited online instantly. Local journalists arrived, followed by news crews. The image of the massive mural spread across social media within hours, captioned with phrases like, "He did it again," and "HOA can't stop this veteran's patriotism." David stood on his porch as cameras clicked and neighbors smiled. But his expression wasn't smug. It was calm, almost solemn. This wasn't about revenge anymore. It was about principle, about standing his ground with dignity. Karen, however, was unraveling. Her phone began ringing nonstop again. Reporters asking for comments. HOA members demanding explanations. Angry homeowners accusing her of bringing shame on the community. Her carefully built image of control was gone, replaced by viral infamy. Every search of her name brought up the same story. The HOA president who tried to ban the American flag. She tried, one last time, to fight back. She filed another complaint, claiming the mural violated architectural consistency. But when the board reviewed it, they refused to support her. Not a single member voted in favor. The HOA's legal advisor even warned her that continued harassment could expose her and the association to a lawsuit. That was the final blow. Within days, Karen resigned from the HOA entirely. Her house went up for sale shortly after. The for sale sign appeared quietly one morning, as if she hoped no one would notice. But everyone did. Neighbors whispered, and a few even celebrated. When the moving truck arrived, no one came out to say goodbye. By the time she left, her curtains were gone, her windows bare. The Queen of Maplewood Ridge had fallen to AS for David. Life slowly returned to normal. The media attention faded, the crowd stopped coming, and the street found its rhythm again. The mural remained for a few more weeks before he took it down voluntarily, saying it had served its purpose. When it came down, the house looked just as it had before, modest, quiet, and clean. Except for one thing. The original flag still flew from its pole, standing tall and undisturbed in the front yard. That IT had survived every letter, every fine, every petty act of defiance. And now, no one dared question it. In fact, a few weeks later, several other houses on the street began raising flags of their own. First one, then another, until nearly every home on the block displayed one. What had once been a rule-bound, uniform neighborhood now shimmered with color and pride. David never bragged about what happened. He didn't need to. The story had taken on a life of its own. It became one of those tales people told in hushed tones at barbecues and town halls, about the veteran who stood up to the HOA, the woman who went too far, and the neighborhood that rediscovered its backbone. Months later, David sat on his porch one evening, the flag fluttering gently above him. The sun dipped low behind the rooftops, casting the street in a warm orange glow. The same street that once demanded sameness now felt alive, individual, and free. He leaned back in his chair, coffee in hand, and watched the fabric move with the wind. The sound of it, soft, steady, rhythmic, was the same sound he'd heard in deserts, in jungles, in distant places where the stakes had been far higher. But here, on this quiet street, it meant something different. It meant peace. Karen's house, freshly repainted by its new owners, sat empty for now. The windows reflected the sunlight, hiding whatever ghosts lingered inside. No one mentioned her anymore. Time had done what rules could not. It restored balance. As the last light faded, David rose from his chair, stepped to the flagpole, and lowered the flag just as he always did. He folded it carefully, the way he'd been taught long ago, and carried it inside. Tomorrow morning, he would raise it again, and no one, ever again, would tell him not to.